Hi, I'm Martin Kelly from Fringe Journal, and we do these author chats. And with me today is Annalee Flower Horne. Annalee Flower Horne is a science fiction writer, open source technologist, historical fashion nerd, a member of Takoma Park, Maryland meeting. They live near Washington, D.C. with their spouse, son, four typewriters, and one greyhound, who we may hear on this author chat. Welcome, Annalee. How are you doing today?
Doing pretty well. How about you?
I'm doing great. I'm very excited to have you here today because, for those of you who don't know, Annalee is the person who helped get us involved in this whole fiction morass in 2021. They pitched the idea over Twitter. Um, I guess we had a announcement of some upcoming issue, and you went, "Psst, can we have a Quaker science fiction anthology?" And somehow we just said yes. Everyone seemed to think it was a good idea, and you and Hillary Besenenix uh, guest edited that first ever November 2021 issue, and today is uh, the third that we're putting out for this November. Not science fiction this time, not speculative fiction, but a general. But we do have
All fiction, yeah.
some speculative stuff here going on. So tell me a little bit about Quakers and Fiction. Historically, Quakers are pretty suspicious of fiction. It kind of smacks of gossip. It's kind of, a waste of time just to read, frilly fiction novels. How do you respond to that? What's your feeling on fiction?
I mean, Quakers live in the larger world, right? And so Quaker opinions on fiction tend to trend with larger opinions. And if you're looking back at, the 1800s and the emergence of the novel, then everybody was like, novels are stupid, novels are for girls, and that was the reaction to a lot of like Jane Austen's work. And in Jane Austen's work, you see her remarking on that, where characters who read novels are made fun of
Mm,
because it was seen as this like frilly little like unserious thing that was basically for young women, and obviously that's not how we look at fiction today. It's this huge part of popular culture, and I don't think there's anything uniquely Quaker about that sort of shift in perspective, because it basically just tracks with the shift in larger culture. There have been times when Quakers have been like doing the whole, oh, well, fiction is lying and lying is against the truth testimony. But it's like, when you're reading a book or a short story, that's not a lie the author is telling you, right? Like
mm,
there's a mutual understanding there, that this is a ride you're going on, and that it is not a reflection of what's happening in the real world.
mm. Yeah, I always love some of those 19th century where they have like little introduction, and it's like, this is something that I found when I was writing it. Like there's a little fake kind of introduction that the author is having, that this how the story came about. Um, it's
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah, well, that's a literary device you still see today sometimes, where people will be like, "Oh, this is a found journal or something," and that's not a
Mhm.
found journal, but whatever. But
Right.
that going in, really, like, even if the book says it is a thing, that it is very rare for somebody to present fiction as nonfiction. Um, it's there have been a few times actually on Twitter where people have done that, where they've told a long story, and then at the end they've been like, "Oh, just kidding, I made all this up," and the reaction is not positive. Like, people do not like being lied to about, even if it's like uh something that doesn't matter, right? Even if it's some story that somebody's telling, people do not like having something presented to them as real when it's not.
Yeah, well, they get invested as they're reading it and
Right, right,
imagining it, and then it's like poof, it's not.
right,
Yeah.
right. But if you start up front and just say, yeah, this is a story, this isn't real, then that's a completely different thing. With the fiction issue, the first one, when Hillary and I were bugging you about it, we had kind of a running joke about anthologies, and we were like always talking about, oh, this is going to be our next anthology, and then we were joking about a Quaker anthology, and we were like, who should publish that is, and so that's why we pinged you. We did not expect you to be like, yeah, sure, let's go.
Yeah, I think I probably responded in like 10 minutes on Twitter from my personal account, like, hey, yeah, this sounds like a neat idea.
Yeah, yeah, and it's been exciting to see it continue past the short little adventure we started with.
Yeah, and one of the things that I wrote the Among Friends opening column this time, and one of the things I was thinking about, how fiction can sometimes tell us more about the truth than straight storytelling could, truthful
Mhm,
storytelling. And so you have this article, and I don't want to have lots of spoilers here. So it's called
mhm.
"Refuse All Their Colors," set in 1777, and some Quaker seamstresses, would it be, have figured out a way of muffling sounds in the meeting house using needlework. And one of the things that I really found kind of interesting, and I've been turning in my mind since I've been reading it, is how sound does sometimes travel very differently when you're there in worship. I hear things very, very differently when we're all settled and gathered and meeting. Um, I'm curious, how did this story come about? What's the source of this? And were you thinking about how sounds travel, or how did this whole sound analogy come about?
So it actually started with looking at, I was doing, don't ask me why, I don't even remember, research on Quakers in the Revolutionary War and
Mhm.
getting kind of angry about how, like, just everybody was messing with Quakers,
Yeah.
just both sides, all sides, everyone involved. And Valley Forge, where the story takes place, was a Quaker neighborhood. It was settled by Welsh Friends, and basically everyone living in Valley Forge was Quaker or connected to Quakers in some way. And the Hessians come through and they just rob everybody, and then the Americans came through and just robbed everybody. So I was looking at that, and I had a separate idea about thread magic and embroidery as a form of sort of magic and spell casting. I don't usually write fantasy. I love fantasy. I read a lot of fantasy. Most of what I write when I sit down to write ends up being science fiction. And I was trying to write fantasy just because it was like, I don't understand why I always write science fiction.
Mhm.
So I ended up writing a very science fiction-y form of fantasy, which is alternate history, where you have to sort of track a change to the world and how it affects the history of the world.
Mhm.
And I was thinking about Quakers and magic and how they would react to. It was a little bit in response to Mary Robinette Kowal has a series called The Glamorous Histories, which is about a form of illusion magic, and that takes place in the early 19th century. Sort of, we're looking at the Regency era, and it's those are very much in response to Jane Austen, and how the first one at least is very much in response to sort of Pride and Prejudice, and how magic would change sort of the Regency romance. But I was looking at that when I was reading those stories, and how Quakers would react to that kind of illusion magic. And so then I was looking at this, history of the Revolutionary War and Quakers in Valley Forge, and how magic would change the picture there. And yeah, there I have in the story Quakers who are like, that's wrong. We shouldn't be doing magic at all. This is not a good thing to be doing. And then I have Quakers, and that also reflects Quaker history of the time, where there were Quakers who were very observant, very plain, and then there were Quakers that like lived in downtown Philadelphia and wore whatever they wanted and were very wealthy and sort of plain-ish. And so my protagonist is one of these sort of plain-ish characters with regards to magic, in that she does the magic, she does the thread work, but hers doesn't look fancy, so it's okay. And I was looking at that, but yeah, the thing about the silence. Sorry, getting back to your original question, um, I have this memory of being at Sandy Spring Friends meeting at one point, and I don't remember why, but I was running late, and I kind of rushed up to the door, but you don't walk in 5 minutes late to meeting like huffing and panting. So I like stopped on the porch,
Mhm.
and like just sort of came to like a screeching halt, and then like opened the door and very slowly walked in. But I was out of breath. And so I'm like panting and trying to pant quietly. And I should have just waited on the porch, but it was too late. I was already in, I was up the stairs in the balcony, and like trying to stop panting. And it was like,
Mhm.
everybody in this room can hear me breathing really loudly. And yeah, you're right. Like, if I had been in any other crowded room, even a library, a quiet room, and I had been panting, I wouldn't have cared. I wouldn't have been like, everybody can hear me.
Mhm.
But in meeting, sound travels differently, and sounds that are distracting. There are sounds that are not distracting that you would expect to be, and then there are sounds that are just sort of normal human noises. They're like, wow, this is really distracting in this context.
Yeah.
Um, so it's like, yeah, Quakers that had the ability to do magic, one of their primary concerns would be acoustics.
Mhm.
And there's a reference in the story also, it doesn't just quiet sound, it can also redirect sound. And I was thinking there about modern Quaker meetings and the struggles that we have with accessibility, because
Yeah.
sound systems that are designed to amplify sound are expecting the sound to come from one place.
Mhm.
And if you have a preacher in a pulpit, that's really easy. And if you have to wire the entire room for sound such that it will pick up sound, spread it everywhere, and not echo back into the microphone that picked it up in the first place. That is actually a pretty
Not
difficult
get all the
technical challenge.
panting and the coughing and
Yeah, yeah,
squirming.
sort out
Feel
those
great perhaps
noises.
if someone
Yeah,
loses
yeah,
off.
but also not have, the speakers feed back into the mic and create that horrible screeching noise we all love. It's a difficult technical challenge, and so I was thinking about that in terms of friends and, what they would be doing with magic, and I was like, yeah, one of the biggest challenges that Quakers have, that if they had sound magic, is dealing with the sorting out sounds in meeting, the sounds you don't want, the sounds you do want, and how to handle that.
Yeah, it reminded me too of Zoom and all the Zoom meetings too, where we're having the noise suppression and the voice isolation and all of
Mhm.
this. Even here online, we're always worried about sounds and trying to get sounds intelligible
Yeah.
uh, with like 100 people on a Zoom or however many.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was sort of where the sound aspect came from, and I came to that through sort of multiple paths, looking at Quaker history and the Revolutionary War, looking at alternate history and magic, and how Quakers in the world would respond to magic existing in the world.
Mhm.
And yeah, some of them would use it, some of them would be like, no, can we not? And then, you'd meet in the middle. You'd have Quaker meetings that were like, yeah, we're going to do this for these specific purposes, but we're also going to frown on it.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of like a little bit of look the other way kind of a frown in your story. Like they
Yeah.
knew that this kind of little witchy work was being done, and are like, you really shouldn't do it, but not uh, going against it necessarily.
Right. So the meeting actually agreed to it. It was just that there were several holdouts that were like, I'm not going to stand in the way of this,
Yeah.
but I just am going to turn up my nose and be judgmental about this witch work that's happening on the carpets.
Yeah, no, that sounds about right. It sounds about even today, if we had a little bit of witch work, probably have a little bit of that kind of disagreement, but agree to live discernment going on. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, great. Well, I don't want to spoil any more of the story. There are some famous figures who make cameos in it. It's a wonderful story. So refuse all their colors.
That actually happened, by the way. The entire skirmish that's in there actually occurred.
Okay.
Um, I do not have any evidence that there were any. Actually, well, no, we do know that there were Quakers present. We do not know that there were any Quakers present that were like, "Hey, can we have our stuff back?"
Yeah. So and things were taken out of the meeting house too, documents and things.
We don't actually. So the meeting house is actually a few miles from the mill. The Potts family, Isaac Potts, was a friend,
Yeah.
and William Dewey's, the guy that ran the mill, was also a friend. Many of the staff. There were actually a lot of both enslaved and free African Americans, I think enslaved as well as free African Americans, working at the mill and the ironworks next door. I don't actually, I should double check if there were enslaved people there. There were definitely a bunch of black men working there.
Well, that
And
was right about the time when it was becoming a disownable offense to have
right.
slaves, and so probably an industrial site would have still had slaves.
Well, so there's also the question of ownership, because that was right around the time when Quakers outlawed the owning of slaves, but many meetings did not outlaw renting enslaved labor
Huh?
until many years later. Maryland did that around, I want to say, 1801, basically because Johns Hopkins wouldn't come correct.
Mm.
He was like, fine, I don't own any other human beings anymore. I will just buy their labor from other people. And Stony Run was finally like, dude, like,
Yeah.
knock it off or leave. We're
I
so
mean,
tired.
universities had all sorts of problems trying to figure out the history and sort out the history of that
Right.
and
Right.
deal with
But
it. Yeah.
yeah, so there was a bunch of there were Quakers. Dewey's was a friend, and he was present at this skirmish. We don't actually know that at that point they came up to the meeting house and took anything. They
Mhm.
did definitely take things later. The meeting house and basically every other church in the neighborhood, Quaker and non, got converted into either hospital space or some other military use during the winter
Yeah.
that the Washington's army was in Valley Forge. This story actually takes place slightly before that, in September. They didn't move in until I want to say November, December. But this was before they and the British were kind of circling each other around Philadelphia at the time.
Great. So lots of real history interwoven here into your story. That's great.
Yeah.
Well, great. That's Annalee's story is in the November 2023 issue of Friends Journal, which will be online on November 1st and in print wherever you get your Friends Journal subscription. So come to the site and learn more about Friends Journal and our issue. So thanks, Annalee, for
Thank you
coming.
so much.